September 18th, 1944. Peleliu Island, Western Pacific, 05:06 a.m. The sky was still black when the first scream echoed through the coral ridges. Corporal Samuel Hawkeye Keller froze, cheek pressed to the cool limestone wall of the observation post he and his spotter had carved out the night before. The air was thick, salt, cordite, and the sickly sweetness of bodies that had been cooking under the sun for days. Somewhere beyond the jagged reef spines, a single flare hissed upward, painting the island in a weak, ghostly white. And in that sudden wash of light, Keller saw movement. At first he thought it was smoke rolling through the pass below. But smoke didn't wear helmets. It didn't carry rifles. It didn't move in perfect silence. Hundreds of silhouettes flowing through the narrow coral funnel like a living river. Keller's breath stalled in his throat. A full Japanese battalion, 6, maybe 700 men, was advancing straight through the choke point he was overlooking. His pulse steadied, his jaw locked. His hands, cold moments ago, settled naturally around the worn stock of his M1903A4 Springfield. Everything inside him clicked into place. Behind him, slumped against the stone, his spotter, Private Lewis, stared blankly at nothing. He'd taken a mortar fragment an hour before dawn. Keller had wrapped him, tried to drag him down the slope, tried to keep him breathing. But the island didn't care about attempts. On Peleliu, everything died. Quick, slow, it didn't matter. Now Keller was alone, and the Japanese were already within 200 yards. He slid forward onto the coral shelf, elbows settling into familiar grooves they had chipped out days earlier. His scope lens, smudged with dust, caught the faint glow of the flare still drifting down from the sky through the crosshairs, the shapes sharpened. Officers leading the column, swords at their hips, machine gun crews dragging Type 92s over their shoulders, runners weaving between ranks like nervous shadows. Too many, far too many. Reinforcements were 15, maybe 20 minutes out. But this wasn't a matter of surviving until help arrived. This was about stopping what was coming. If the enemy reached the American line behind him, the entire flank would fold. Peleliu's coral ridges formed a maze. A single breach turned the map into chaos. Keller inhaled once, long and slow, letting the tremble leave his muscles. His rifle held 5 rounds. His pack held 37 more. And the pass below funneled the enemy perfectly, narrowing them to a single predictable stream. If he was going to die today, he wasn't doing it quietly. He found the first target, a lieutenant stepping into a sliver of moonlight, hand raised to signal the advance. Keller exhaled. The Springfield cracked. The officer toppled backward like his strings had been cut. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. The battalion didn't even slow. Keller chambered a second round, the bolt cycling with a metallic snap that echoed softly through the stone pocket. A runner sprinted forward. Keller fired again. The man pitched sideways, collapsed into another soldier, and both disappeared into the black mass behind them. Now the column hesitated. Good. Keller shifted left, lining up a machine gun crew struggling to set up their weapon on a coral outcrop. He didn't aim for the gunner. He aimed for the man lifting the ammunition belt, 1 shot. The entire crew froze. Another shot. The assistant gunner folded, arms limp. A shout rose from the formation, confused, angry, disbelieving. They didn't know where he was. They had no idea they were walking into a killing box. A third rifle team moved into the pass, their officer waving frantically for the men to advance faster, push through the choke point before the Americans reacted. Keller smiled grimly. He'd seen this kind of panic before, commanders feeling a victory slipping away, forcing their units into a meat grinder to regain momentum. He waited for the officer to step up onto a flat coral stone, perfectly illuminated by the last dying shimmer of the flare. The Springfield cracked again. The officer spun, collapsed on his back, and the column behind him buckled in confusion. Now the shouting turned chaotic. Men stumbled over each other. Some tried to rush forward, others dove for cover. A few fired wildly into the ridges above, bullets sparking off limestone, nowhere near Keller's hide. He checked his ammo. 31 rounds left. He could make those count. He had to. Down in the pass, a machine gun squad finally managed to deploy a Type 92 woodpecker and began sweeping fire across the reef. Keller ducked instinctively as tracers hissed overhead, chewing into stone like angry hornets. The enemy crew was trained, disciplined, but not fast enough. Keller rose, aimed through the scope, and put a round directly through the gunner's throat. The gun fell silent. The battalion was collapsing, not from casualties, but from disorientation. Their officers were down. Their runners were gone. Their heavy weapons crews were shredded before they could even anchor their tripods. Keller looked at the chaos below and understood something terrifying. He was winning, alone. But that's when he saw movement on the far ridge, a squad of Japanese infantry breaking off from the main force, spreading out, searching for the sniper's nest. They didn't know exactly where he was, but they were closing in, triangulating the cracks of his rifle. The fight was about to change. Keller wiped the dust from his scope, steadied his breathing again, and shifted deeper into the shadow of the coral shelf. He was nowhere near finished. The moment Keller saw the flanking squad peel off from the main body, his heartbeat slowed instead of rising. That was the strange thing about him. Under fire, his mind sharpened, not scattered. He shifted his position by a few inches, pressing deeper into the stone pocket to reduce his silhouette. Tiny coral shards dug into his ribs, but he ignored them. Below, the pass was turning into a bottleneck of confusion. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers pressed forward, unsure whether to advance, retreat, or spread out and search for the unseen killer above them. They had not expected resistance from this ridge. American snipers usually operated in teams, supported by infantry. But this? One man firing with surgical precision, eliminating every officer who tried to seize control. It didn't make sense to them, and confusion in war was a weapon all its own. Keller lined up another target, a radio operator desperately trying to crank the hand generator on his radio pack, his face twisted with panic. If he got that set working, if he called artillery from the ridges behind Japanese lines, Keller's position would be vaporized in seconds. Keller's breath fogged lightly against the stock. He steadied, fired. The radio operator slumped sideways, wires spilling across the coral. He cycled the bolt again, smooth, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The Springfield's action was warm from repeated firing. He rested the crosshairs on the radio pack itself and fired another round, punching through the fragile casing, shattering the vacuum tubes inside. Even if someone else reached it, the radio was useless. One more piece of the battalion's coordination gone. A sudden shriek ripped the air. A squad leader charging up the pass, katana raised, screaming for his men to follow. Keller dropped him mid-stride. Another man rushed to grab the sword and continue the charge. Keller dropped him too. A Marine on Peleliu once said the island made time stretch strangely. Minutes felt like hours. Battles felt like eternities. But for Keller, the next sequence unfolded in a blur, an unbroken string of judgment calls, trigger pulls, breath control, and instinct. His world shrank to the tiny circle of glass inside his scope. He counted 27 rounds left. He shifted his aim again. Another machine gun crew was dragging their weapon behind a coral ridge, trying to flank the American line. Keller exhaled, put a round through the loader's chest, then through the gunner's face as he knelt to set the tripod. The third member of the crew dove behind a rock, only for Keller to shoot him in the legs as he moved. Not a kill, but enough. He didn't waste bullets on unnecessary shots. Pain was as effective as death in crippling a crew. The main column hesitated again. Men shouted, orders conflicting, formations dissolving. Keller adjusted his angle, spotting movement further down slope. A young soldier crawling forward with a satchel charge clutched to his chest. He wasn't a runner. He wasn't flanking. He was something far more dangerous, a volunteer willing to crawl into the rocks and detonate himself under Keller's position. Keller fired once, missed by an inch when the soldier's elbow jerked. A rare miss. He corrected instantly, fired again. The satchel charge dropped from limp hands. Keller didn't look away. He scanned for more volunteers. He knew Japanese commanders often ordered suicide crawlers to target observation posts. One could end this entire fight with a single explosion. His eyes moved fast. Left, right, down, far ridge, choke point, return sweep. Nothing else. Not yet. But the flanking squad he'd spotted earlier was climbing quickly, 20 men moving with discipline and purpose. They weren't guessing anymore. They were tracking his muzzle flashes between shots. Keller needed to break up the main assault before the flank arrived. If both forces hit him simultaneously, he'd be pinned from 2 directions, and all the precision in the world wouldn't save him. He checked his ammo again. 23 rounds. He had to make them decide that the ridge was too costly to take. He aimed at a cluster of NCOS shouting into the mass. He chose the loudest one, a sergeant whipping his men forward with a bamboo rod. Crack. The man dropped. Another NCO stepped up. Keller put a round through his sternum before the man could finish shouting an order. 2 more tried to rally the troops. 2 more fell. Now the battalion stopped advancing altogether. Keller could feel it. The attack had lost its shape. Momentum shattered. A battalion without officers was just a crowd with rifles. But the flanking squad was now within 80 yards, scrambling up the reef on his right. Keller swung his rifle around, careful not to scrape the barrel against the stone, and spotted the lead man helmet low, Type 99 rifle ready, crawling with veteran precision. Crack. The lead climber rolled backward, tumbling down the coral spine. The man behind him panicked and fired blindly toward Keller's general direction. Bullets sparked off the rocks inches above Keller's head. He adjusted slightly, waited for the muzzle flash of the next shot, and placed a round straight into it. The man slumped forward, his rifle clattering down the slope. But the rest didn't stop. They were committed. Keller fired again, a shoulder hit, not fatal. The man screamed and dropped his weapon, slowing the squad. He fired again, a clean shot, 4 flankers down, 15 to go. But the sound of something heavier made Keller's heart spike for the first time. A Type 92 heavy machine gun was being dragged into place on the far side of the pass. Keller had killed 2 crews already, but these men were fast, disciplined, and well covered behind a coral shelf. If they finished setup, they could pin him completely. He aimed, but the angle was terrible. Only a helmet and 1 hand were visible. He fired anyway. The helmet snapped back. The body fell out of sight. The assistant gunner reached for the weapon. Keller fired again, hit the rib. The man crashed onto the tripod. 1 left. The last crewman dove behind a rock and froze, unsure whether to retrieve the gun or abandon it. Keller knew the answer for him. He put 1 more round into the rock he was hiding behind, a warning shot with the sound of certainty. The man dropped the weapon and bolted. Keller breathed once. 17 rounds left. Then he heard it, something he'd been dreading. A sharp, rising cry. A banzai charge. The column, what remained of it, surged forward again, fueled by desperation rather than coordination. Hundreds of men trying to force their way through the pass in one last push. Keller braced himself, wiped the fog from his scope, and prepared to do the impossible. The banzai charge hit the coral pass like a living tidal wave, ragged, furious, desperate. Keller saw the first ranks sprinting hard, bayonets glinting in the dim morning light, bodies slamming into the narrow walls of the funnel as they tried to push through sheer numbers alone. Their screams rolled up the ridge in a fractured chorus: rage, fear, duty, all blending into one sound that made the coral tremble beneath Keller's elbows. For the first time since the ambush began, Keller felt the weight of the moment. He wasn't firing to delay them anymore. He was firing to prevent an avalanche from reaching him. He found the lead runner, a corporal waving a flag, shouting for the men to follow, and put a round through his jaw. The man flipped backward, boots flying up. Another soldier immediately took his place, sprinting over the body. Crack! Keller dropped him too. He cycled the bolt with rapid, practiced precision, barely watching the brass bounce across the stone. Shell casings rolled against his forearm, hot against his skin. He ignored the sting. Another runner. Another shot. Another body folding into the mass behind it. 14 rounds left. The banzai charge slowed, but it didn't stop. Pure human momentum pushed it forward. Bodies crashed into each other. Men tripped over corpses, scrambled to their feet, surged again. Some slipped in blood-slick grooves and vanished under boots behind them. Keller fired again, and again, and again. Each shot tore a hole in the wave, but the wave simply closed and continued. The pass was filling with bodies now, clogging the route, but still they came. "Come on," Keller muttered to himself, breath trembling. "Slow down. Slow down." He aimed at the highest-ranking man he could identify, an officer shouting from behind the charge, sword raised. Crack. Sword dropped, charge staggered, momentum faltered. A few men hesitated. A few dove behind coral fragments, but others kept coming. Keller fired at their legs, not their chests, dropping men faster, turning the slope into a heap of tangled limbs. He didn't need kills right now. He needed obstruction. Bodies were obstacles. Obstacles slowed armies. Another shot. Another man fell screaming. The man behind him tripped, stumbled, knocked others off balance. The charge splintered. But the flanking squad wasn't finished. They were climbing again, shifting left, trying to use shadows and coral shelves to mask their movement. Keller swung his rifle without hesitation, scanning through jagged limestone like a predator hunting through brush. He caught a helmet. Crack. A man dropped. 10 rounds left. Another helmet. Crack. Another one ripped backward, skull snapping against stone. 8 left. But one soldier, fast, disciplined, probably a veteran, used the distraction of the charge to close the distance. Keller caught the flicker of motion out of the edge of his vision, a figure darting between coral teeth, rifle raised, bayonet fixed. Keller didn't have time for a scope shot. He dropped the Springfield flat, grabbed the barrel, and swung it outward like a spear. The attacker lunged upward toward the hide. Keller jammed the rifle forward, slamming the stock into the man's face. Bone cracked. The Japanese soldier staggered, blood spraying across the coral wall. Keller snatched the rifle back, chambered around by instinct. Crack! The attacker dropped at arm's length, collapsing partially into the observation pocket. Keller shoved the body out with his boot, heart thundering against his ribs. He exhaled once. Calm again. He raised the rifle and returned to the pass. The charge was faltering. Men dragged themselves over the growing piles of bodies, but their numbers thinned. Discipline had been replaced with hesitation, hesitation with fear, fear with silence. The battalion was losing heart. But Keller wasn't safe, because now they were angry. Behind the pass, he saw a team dragging something heavier, long, cylindrical, toward the coral shelf. Not a machine gun, not a mortar, a grenade launcher, a Type 89 knee mortar with a full crate of rounds. If they set it up, the entire ridge would be pulverized. Keller inhaled sharply. 7 rounds left. He aimed at the man carrying the tube. Crack! Hit dead center. The launcher dropped. Another man rushed to grab it. Crack! Hit his hip. The man fell screaming. A third crawled forward, desperate, reaching. Crack! Round through the forearm. Launcher kicked backward into the dirt. But the fourth man, clever, fast, didn't go for the launcher at all. He went for the ammunition crate. Keller fired, missed by inches. 6 rounds left. The soldier ripped open the crate, grabbed a round and tried to shove it into the tube. Keller had no angle. He shifted left. Stones scraped his elbow. He found half the man's head visible over a rock. Crack. The man dropped sideways with the mortar round still clutched in his fingers. The ridge fell silent again, except for distant shouting, orders failing, men trying to reorganize, confusion spreading like a virus. But Keller saw movement to his right. 3 flankers remained, veterans, silent, steady, climbing low. He fired fast. Crack. 1 down. The second disappeared behind a coral spur. The third sprinted upslope, closing distance fast. Keller pivoted. His elbow slipped on blood-coated stone. His scope jolted. Crack. Miss. Impact hit the ridge behind the attacker. The soldier was already within 20 yards, knife drawn, face smeared with dirt, eyes blazing. Keller didn't have time for another shot. He dropped the Springfield again and reached for the K-bar on his belt, but the attacker leapt first, slamming into the ridge, grabbing Keller's sleeve. The two grappled on the narrow ledge, coral slicing into skin, boots grinding against dust. The soldier lunged with the knife. Keller caught his wrist, shoved it sideways, forced the blade into the stone. The attacker snarled, kicked Keller's knee, nearly knocking him off the ridge. Keller slammed his forearm into the man's throat, driving him backward. They rolled, twisting, struggling, choking on dust. The knife clattered away. The attacker surged forward, trying to bite, claw. Anything to kill the sniper. Keller's hand found a fist-sized coral fragment. He swung once. The soldier reeled. He swung again. The body collapsed halfway into the observation pocket. The ridge fell silent. Keller lay panting, arms trembling. 5 rounds left. He dragged himself back into position, wiped blood, his or theirs, he didn't know, from his cheek and raised the Springfield again. Below him, the battalion was breaking. The banzai charge had died. The mortar team was destroyed. The machine guns were silent. But the Japanese weren't retreating. They were regrouping. And Keller saw something that froze his blood. A cluster of officers and NCOs had taken shelter behind a coral boulder, arguing, pointing, shouting. They had realized the truth. If they didn't kill the sniper, their entire battalion would be wiped out in the pass. They weren't retreating at all. They were preparing a final push, one last, coordinated, disciplined assault. And Keller had 5 rounds left. He adjusted his grip, settled into the stone, calmed his breathing. This was going to be the hardest part. Keller stared down into the pass, his breathing slow, steady, controlled. 5 rounds. That was all he had left. Not enough for a battalion, not enough for another banzai charge, not enough for a prolonged fight, but it was enough for something else. Enough to break the spine of what remained. Enough to make them believe the ridge was held by a full company of Marines rather than a single battered sniper on bleeding elbows and shaking legs. Below him, the remaining Japanese officers were huddled behind a thick coral boulder, desperate to salvage the attack. One, taller than the rest, sword still sheathed, pointed uphill and barked orders with a calm, authoritative voice. Not shouting, not panicking, directing, a real leader, a problem. Keller knew immediately. If that officer lived, the battalion wasn't defeated yet. He wiped sweat from his brow, ignoring the sting as it mixed with blood from a shallow cut above his eyebrow. He took a knee, steadied the barrel, and lined up the crosshairs. The officer stepped half an inch into view. Crack! He fell backward, sword clattering loudly against the coral. The men beside him froze, stared, shouted in disbelief. That kill hit them harder than the others' officers carried weight. Authority. Their death shattered confidence more effectively than any number of fallen riflemen. 4 rounds left. The remaining NCOs scrambled to reorganize the survivors. Keller shifted his aim. He waited. Patience was everything now. Fire too fast, he'd waste a bullet. Fire too slow, they'd mount a new charge. One NCO rose to shout an order. Crack! His helmet flew off as he collapsed. 3 rounds left. Another NCO grabbed a flag, tried to wave men forward. Crack! The flag dropped beside him. 2 rounds left. The pass, once teeming with hundreds, had thinned to only a few dozen clinging to the edges of coral, terrified and confused. Some tried to bandage each other. Some stared up at the ridge, expecting another rain of bullets. Some simply lay still, pretending to be dead. But Keller wasn't watching them now. He was watching the far ridge. A final squad, 6 men, was cautiously advancing from a separate angle. Not a charge, not a rush. A careful, deliberate movement. Veterans or maybe engineers using methodical spacing, smart, capable, deadly. These men weren't attacking the ridge. They were hunting him. Keller shifted, slow and silent, sliding deeper behind a jagged outcrop. His left hand pressed into the warm stone. His right thumb flicked the bolt open. 2 rounds left, gleaming dimly in the magazine. The 6 men crawled in a spread, 3 low, 3 high, rifles raised, bayonets fixed. He chose the highest one first. Crack. The man rolled backward into the rocks. 1 round left. The remaining 5 froze in place. Then they split. 3 pressed forward, 2 dropped behind them to provide covering fire. Keller inhaled sharply. He wasn't going to drop 5 men with 1 bullet. This wasn't a moment for hope. This was a moment for strategy. He didn't aim for the men. He aimed for the rock above them. He waited until they clustered, 2 behind one coral tooth, 2 moving toward a ledge. He steadied his breath. Crack! The bullet struck the stone with a piercing snap. Coral shattered into razor-sharp fragments, exploding downward like shrapnel. The 2 exposed soldiers screamed as the shards tore into their faces and necks. One dropped instantly. The other staggered, blind and choking on blood. 3 left, but Keller had no bullets. His rifle was empty. The 3 surviving attackers saw their moment. They broke into a sprint, fast, determined, bounding between coral peaks, coming directly for the ridge. Keller dropped the Springfield and yanked his K-bar free. He pushed himself up as the first attacker crested the ridge. The man lunged, bayonet first. Keller sidestepped and slammed the knife upward into the man's ribs. The soldier screamed, dropped his rifle, and tumbled down the slope. 2 left. The second man charged out from the left, swinging downward with a rifle butt. Keller raised his forearm to block, and pain shot up his elbow as the strike connected. He jabbed forward with the knife, catching the man's thigh. The attacker howled and collapsed, clutching the wound. Keller ripped the rifle from the man's hands. The third attacker appeared, charging full speed, screaming, bayonet extended, blade aimed straight for Keller's chest. Keller swung the captured rifle like a bat. The impact cracked loudly through the ridge. The attacker crumpled, the bayonet clattering uselessly against the rock. Silence dropped over the cliff. Keller leaned forward, chest heaving, sweat and blood running together on his arms. He scanned the pass one more time. It was over. The battalion had broken. Not retreated, not regrouped. Broken. The survivors, those still alive, were dragging each other away, stumbling, limping, half-crawling back through the pass. They weren't looking for the sniper anymore. They were escaping him. Below the ridge, the entire coral funnel was a graveyard. Officers, machine gun crews, runners, volunteers, flankers, all caught in the perfect kill zone of one Marine who refused to move, refused to break, refused to let the enemy through. Keller exhaled slowly. His hands trembled now, the adrenaline draining from his veins all at once. His vision blurred slightly as exhaustion hit him like a wave. Leaves rustled behind him. He spun, K-bar raised. "Easy, Marine! Easy!" 3 Marines scrambled onto the ridge, weapons raised. One slid down beside him, eyes wide. "Christ. Keller, you did all this?" Keller looked down at the pass. The bodies, the broken weapons, the ripples of confused retreat. He nodded once, barely. The Marine beside him exhaled in pure disbelief. "We heard firing for 11 straight minutes," he whispered. 42 rounds, 11 minutes, and you held them off alone." Keller didn't answer. He didn't need to. Another Marine picked up Keller's empty Springfield and stared at it like it was some kind of holy relic. "Corporal," he said softly, "you don't understand. You just stopped a whole damn battalion." Keller finally let himself sink against the coral wall, exhausted but still alert enough to mutter, "They picked the wrong pass." Far below, the rising sun finally reached the battlefield, spilling pale light across the coral ridges, the abandoned weapons, the shattered formations, and the long trail of footprints marking the enemy's retreat. The fight for Peleliu would continue. The war would continue. But so would Keller. Because some men fought with rifles, some fought with artillery, some fought with tanks, and some, very few, fought with nothing but patience, precision, and an iron will that refused to break. Corporal Samuel Hawkeye Keller was one of them. And on that September morning, in a narrow coral pass on Peleliu, he proved exactly what one Marine could do when the entire world depended on a steady hand and a clear shot.